I'm Nora Bennett, 36, and last Friday I walked into the Crystal Ballroom at the Silvercrest Hotel. Certain I understood my place in my family, even if it wasn't the place I'd wanted since childhood. The chandeliers threw warm light over ivory linens and white orchids, and the room hummed with names that carried weight in our city. I had chosen a navy dress I bought years ago for a district award ceremony, the one moment my work felt seen beyond the classroom walls. My husband, Ethan, held my hand as cameras blinked and voices floated over the string quartet, and I tried to ignore how often he glanced at his phone. Across the entrance, my father stood in a charcoal suit, his smile practiced and distant, while his wife Valerie glittered in gold, like the evening was a magazine cover. I listened to the introductions, the small talk, the careful laughter that happens when everyone is measuring everyone else. When Valerie said, "You made it," it sounded like a favor granted instead of a welcome home. A photographer lifted his lens, and I lifted my chin the way you do when you were raised to be gracious. I had no way of knowing that before the night was over, a chair with my name missing would say more about my family than any speech ever had. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and tap that like and subscribe if you've ever had to prove your worth to people who claimed they already knew you. I grew up on report cards and library cards in a house where my mother taught me to sign thank you notes and my father taught me to stand when someone older entered the room. Our version of success was simple: do right by people. Keep your word and leave a place better than you found it. My mother kept a small jar for classroom supply money on the kitchen counter, and when the jar was full, she'd press the bills flat and tuck them into an envelope with a note for the teacher. I learned early that kindness sometimes rides in on small things: pencils, glue sticks, a book that smells like possibility. When my mother died, the house went quiet and practical, and I lost the only person who clapped loudest without needing a reason. Years later, when my father married Valerie, the air around us shifted from sturdy to glossy. Valerie moved us into a world where the napkins matched the invitation font and where introductions came with resumes. And suddenly my classroom stories landed like soft feathers next to the sharp edges of law firms and boardrooms. I stayed where I belonged. Third grade, 28 students, a whiteboard that never stayed clean even when the new family gatherings began to orbit around Lauren, whose promotions arrived the way seasons do, expected and admired. Ethan and I kept our life small on purpose: a 2-bedroom apartment, Sunday dinners, an aging sedan, and the steady rhythm of bills paid on time. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. The contrast between our kitchen table and the Silvercrest Ballroom wasn't just linen and lighting. It was the difference between being valued for what you do and being displayed for what you represent. My father had always spoken about legacy like it was a baton, something you pass to the one who will run the next lap. And for years we'd talked about a scholarship board seat tied to the Bright Future Education Fund, a way to put real dollars into classrooms where teachers stretch paychecks and imagination at the same time. I had binder tabs for that seat research on burnout mentorship pilots, cost per student models that showed how a few $1,000s could turn a chaotic room into a place where learning breathed easier. When the gala invitation arrived with embossed letters and a line about honoring a lifetime of excellence, I tucked one of my students' handwritten thank you notes in my clutch as a private reminder of why I wanted that baton at all. Ethan told me not to worry about the extra shine on the evening that rooms like this only look like they have rules, and I believed him because he never promises what he can't keep. Still, as we crossed the ballroom and the string quartet slid into something triumphant, I felt the old pull the child who wanted her father to see her not just as good, but as good enough. Valerie's smile floated toward us, warm as a light you can't quite step into, and Lauren turned slightly so the board chair could hear about her latest case. I told myself to breathe, to find the center of the room that belonged to me, the one that begins with a roll call and a stack of sharpened pencils. The place cards waited at the front table, like a row of verdicts polished and final, each one announcing who mattered most in a font that didn't smudge. I scanned for my name once, then twice, and a third time, because it's hard to believe absence until it refuses to move. An empty chair sat between my father and the board chair, angled like it had been saved for a story that fit the room. My hand went cold on Ethan's arm as a soft laugh drifted from the head table, and somewhere behind us, the photographer raised his camera again. I felt the weight of the orchids, the chandeliers, the eyes that don't look up unless something breaks. That was the moment I understood the evening wasn't about legacy, it was about a picture that would hang on a wall without me in it. And when Valerie's voice found me from just over my shoulder, gentle as silk pulled tight, I realized part 2 of this night had already begun. Valerie's perfume reached me before her words did a soft, floral edge that somehow made her voice sound sweeter than it was. "Oh, Nora, there you are," she said, as if I'd been misplaced instead of forgotten. Her manicured hand rested lightly on my arm, and she tilted her head toward the front of the room where the VIP table gleamed under a chandelier. "I'm afraid there were some last-minute seating adjustments," she continued. "You understand limited space and so many special guests." I looked down the row of polished name cards, each one neatly printed in silver ink. My father's was placed beside Alan Brooks's, then Valerie's, then Lauren's, followed by donors, district leaders, and board members. Every seat filled except for one, the chair next to my father's right hand. The empty space where my name should have been felt colder than any air conditioning. "There must be a mistake," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. Valerie's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Not a mistake, dear. Just logistics. We thought you'd feel more comfortable with your colleagues." She pointed toward the far side of the ballroom, where table 12 sat half-hidden behind a column. From here, it looked like an afterthought, tucked away with the other teachers. "You'll be among friends there," she added, as if exile could be softened by the word friends. Before I could respond, my father stepped up beside her. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone brisk, his gaze sliding past mine. I waited for him to notice the empty chair to fix what felt like an oversight too absurd to be real. But he only adjusted his cufflinks. "Patricia thought it would be better for networking if Lauren sat up front," he said, still using Valerie's formal name the way he did in public. "She's been helping with the fund's legal filings, and Alan's quite taken with her insight. Dad, this was supposed to be—" I stopped. I could hear the brittle edge creeping into my voice. "You promised I'd be part of tonight's announcement." He nodded, but his expression stayed impassive. "You are part of it, Nora, just from another angle. It's all the same event." Ethan's hand closed gently around mine. "This is her father's retirement dinner," he said evenly. "She should be at his table." Valerie's smile hardened. "And we're so grateful you both came. But these things are delicate, you know. Optics matter." Her voice carried the faintest tremor of satisfaction, the sound of someone who'd arranged things just so. Lauren glanced over her shoulder, then her red dress catching the light. "Oh, Nora," she said brightly. "Didn't see you there. I was just telling Alan about my firm's pro bono initiative. He's fascinated by the crossover between education and corporate compliance." Her laughter bubbled in that effortless way some people learn early in life, the sound of being sure they belong. I could feel my cheeks warming as conversations around us continued polite and distant. The photographer's flash went off again, catching my father mid-laugh with Lauren and Alan. A small spotlight reflected off the glass centerpiece and splintered across the floor where I stood. "Let's sit," Ethan whispered, "before it gets worse." Table 12 wasn't even half full. The linen felt rougher here, the flowers smaller. Across from us sat Martha Chen, a math teacher from my district, and 2 other educators who'd traded comfortable shoes for heels that didn't quite fit the occasion. "I heard you won Teacher of the Year last spring," Martha said softly, offering a kind smile. "Congratulations." "Thank you," I said, trying to match her warmth. The music swelled from the front of the room. Classical elegant meant for people who weren't us. I could see my father moving from guest to guest, introducing Lauren again and again, his hand on her shoulder as though she were the one carrying his name forward. Each time he passed our table, he avoided eye contact, his focus drawn instead to the people who could shape his next chapter. Ethan kept glancing at his phone, the faint glow lighting his face in intervals. "Everything okay?" I asked quietly. "Just some timing details," he said, sliding it into his jacket pocket. "You're handling this better than anyone should have to." "I'm fine," I answered, though we both knew I wasn't. Across the ballroom, Valerie's laughter rose like a bell as she gestured toward Lauren telling some story that made the surrounding table beam with admiration. From where I sat, it looked like a portrait of pride, my father smiling, my stepmother shining, my stepsister flawless in crimson. When the lights dimmed, a hush settled across the room. The MC introduced my father with a flourish, and the applause that followed filled every corner of the ballroom. He stepped onto the stage composed and sure, the way he'd always looked at assemblies and award ceremonies. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began. "After 30 years in education, I can honestly say it's been a privilege to serve this community." I waited for his voice to find its way to the part that included me, the daughter who'd followed his path into teaching, who'd spent her weekends organizing literacy fairs, who'd once believed that legacy meant walking beside him, not behind. But as he continued each name, he mentioned belonged to someone else, the district superintendent, the donors, the sponsors, the new faces who'd shaped the fund. Then came the part that drew a murmur of admiration from the audience. And of course, he said, turning toward the VIP table, my wife Valerie, whose support made every achievement possible. And her daughter Lauren Pierce, who has become like my own. He paused there, his smile deepening. I'm especially proud of her tonight. She represents everything we hope our students will aspire to: ambition, excellence, and perseverance. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed again. Lauren stood gracious and glowing, waving like someone receiving an honorary degree. My father beamed at her, his hand lifting in a small gesture of pride I had once dreamed would be for me. Martha's hand touched mine under the tablecloth. "I'm sorry," she murmured. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. The applause faded, and my father moved on to thank the catering staff, the event planners, and the sponsors. Then, without a pause, he said, "Now, before we continue, I'd like to make a special announcement about the Bright Future Education Fund." The audience leaned in, as if sensing the weight of it. Ethan's hand found mine again, steady and sure. I remembered how my father had promised this role years ago. "When I retire, you'll take my seat on the board. You'll bring real classroom perspective." I'd prepared proposals, grant outlines, and mentorship initiatives. I had even bought a Navy binder embossed with the fund's logo. The Bright Future Fund, my father continued, has received a generous $5 million sponsorship from the Grantwell Corporation. The crowd murmured approval. And tonight I am honored to announce who will take my place on the fund's board of directors. I leaned forward, breath caught in my chest. The lights gleamed off the microphone stand as he smiled toward the front table. Please join me in congratulating Ms. Lauren Pierce, who will succeed me as the newest member of the Bright Future Education Fund Board. Applause thundered. Lauren rose gracefully, shaking hands, the flash of her ring catching the light. Valerie dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, pretending to hold back tears. I sat motionless, the sound blurring into a hollow echo. 2 years of research drafts and outreach evaporated in a single sentence. Ethan's hand tightened around mine. "That was supposed to be yours," he said under his breath. "I know," I whispered. My father spoke again, praising Lauren's unique legal expertise and fresh perspective. The irony landed like a stone, a fund meant to support teachers, now led by someone who had never stepped foot in a classroom. I stared at the stage as my father's words drifted through the applause. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see what insiders miss. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The irony pressed heavier with every cheer that followed. Around me, the other teachers shifted, uncomfortably unsure where to look. I caught a flicker of movement from Ethan's phone screen, just one line of text before he locked it again. "Trust me." I didn't know what he meant or why his tone had changed, only that something in his posture had steadied the quiet before a tide turns. I looked back toward the stage where my father was shaking Alan Brooks's hand, basking in approval that felt rehearsed. Lauren smiled at the cameras, her future secured at my expense. I reached for my glass of water, but my hand trembled too much to lift it. Across the room, Valerie's gaze met mine for a fraction of a second, satisfied, polished, untouchable. The string quartet started again, their music smoothing the air as servers refilled champagne. Ethan leaned close, his voice low. "You won't have to fight this alone." The chandelier above us flickered, once scattering light across the polished floor like fragments of glass. It felt like a signal quiet, but certain that the night wasn't over yet, and the real reckoning had just begun. Applause still echoed through the ballroom as I stared at the stage, unable to move. My father stood smiling beside Lauren while cameras flashed from every corner. Valerie leaned in to adjust her stepdaughter's hair for the perfect shot, her hand trembling with excitement. The moment stretched long enough for the realization to settle. Everything I had prepared, everything I had been promised, was gone. The air felt heavy, the kind that presses down on your lungs until you can only breathe shallowly. Ethan's hand was still wrapped around mine, but even that anchor couldn't keep the room from spinning. Across the table, Martha shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the stage, then back to me. "That's not right," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clapping. I didn't answer. The string quartet started again, and the laughter from the VIP table rose above the music like an unspoken chorus. I saw my father shake Alan's hand, his face lit with pride, while Lauren accepted congratulations with practiced grace. The fund's logo glowed behind them on a massive screen, bright, modern, and suddenly meaningless to me. Ethan's phone vibrated once more. He glanced at it, his expression sharpening for a brief second before he turned it face down on the table. I reached for my water glass, but my fingers felt stiff, almost foreign. "What did he say to you?" I asked quietly. Ethan hesitated. "Just timing," he said. "You'll understand soon." His tone was calm, but something about it made me uneasy. I wanted to believe him, but the hollow ache in my chest left little room for trust in that moment. A server passed behind us carrying another tray of champagne. The glasses clinked softly, their sound far more elegant than the reality of the moment. Martha leaned closer. "I can't imagine how that must feel," she said. "You've done more for this district than anyone at that table." I forced a small smile, the kind you give when you're too tired to argue. "It's fine," I said. "We all know how things work around here." My voice cracked on the last word. She didn't press further. My father returned to the microphone. "This fund will help create pathways for new educational leaders," he announced, "and under Lauren's guidance, we'll bring in a fresh perspective that bridges law, business, and education." The audience applauded again, some nodding in approval, others just following the cue. Each clap felt like a nail sealing a door I'd never be allowed to open. I thought of the folders waiting on my desk at home, 2 years of proposals, surveys, and notes on teacher mentorships. None of it mattered now. Ethan stood suddenly, pulling his jacket straight. "Excuse me a moment," he said, his voice low but firm. "Where are you going?" I asked, though I already knew it wasn't a question I'd get an answer to. "Just need to make a call," he said, then leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "Stay calm. I'll handle this." Before I could reply, he disappeared into the crowd, his dark suit blending among the others. At the front of the room, Lauren was already fielding questions from donors. "I've drafted a few ideas for how to strengthen administrative leadership," she said confidently, her voice carrying across the tables. "We'll start by identifying high-performing principals who can transition into district-level management." It was the opposite of what I'd envisioned. The money meant for classrooms would be rerouted to offices that already had more than enough. Valerie clapped enthusiastically, whispering something to a reporter who took notes without looking up. Martha shook her head. "They're celebrating the wrong things," she muttered. I watched as another group formed around Lauren, cameras flashing again. My father laughed, looking younger than I'd seen him in years. For him, the night was perfect prestige recognition, family unity on display. The only person missing from that picture was the daughter who followed in his footsteps. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan appeared on the screen. "Trust me. This will make sense soon." I stared at the words, confused and frustrated. I typed back, "What are you doing?" but didn't hit send. Something about his confidence stopped me. He rarely promised outcomes he couldn't deliver, and the calm in his earlier tone still echoed in my mind. I set the phone face down beside my plate. Valerie's voice floated across the room. "Lauren's already planning a new sponsorship model," she told a small circle of guests. "Real innovation, not just bake sales and donation jars." The others laughed politely. My pulse quickened. "Bake sales and donation jars," she said again, louder this time. It was a dig aimed squarely at teachers like me who'd spent weekends raising money for crayons and books. Martha's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. 2 years, I said quietly, unable to keep it inside. 2 years of research. For this. "What will you do now?" Martha asked gently. "Keep teaching," I said, though it sounded like both a promise and a question. From the stage, my father continued his speech, thanking the sponsors again and calling the fund a partnership between education and enterprise. I barely heard the rest. My focus was on Ethan's empty chair and the faint sound of his voice somewhere near the back of the ballroom. The tone was calm, deliberate, like someone giving instructions rather than asking for help. The lights dimmed slightly for a video montage. Images of my father's career filled the screens, students' graduations, community events. Each photo was met with warm applause, every milestone celebrated. I waited for one image that might include me, but there was none. The slideshow faded to black and the applause returned. I stayed seated, clapping quietly out of habit more than pride. When the lights came up again, I saw Ethan re-enter through the side door. He moved with purpose, scanning the room until our eyes met. There was something different in his expression, steady, certain. He returned to his seat without a word, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "Everything all right?" I asked. "It will be," he said softly. "Watch Alan." His gaze shifted toward the front table. Alan Brooks. The board chair was scrolling through his phone, his face tense. I could see the shift happen in real time, the way his smile faltered, the sudden frown forming as he read something on the screen. He looked up, scanning the room, his eyes landing briefly on Ethan, then on my father. "Before we continue," Alan said, suddenly rising to his feet, "I'd like to clarify something about our sponsorship agreements." The microphone picked up a faint buzz as conversations quieted. "This wasn't on the schedule," Valerie said under her breath, glancing toward my father. Lauren looked momentarily unsure, but the cameras were already turning toward Alan. "Our primary sponsor, the Grantwell Corporation, included several stipulations in the funding contract," he said. "It's possible there's been a misunderstanding about leadership qualifications." My father blinked clearly, caught off guard. "I'm sure everything is in order," he said with a tight smile. "We can discuss it after the event." Alan shook his head. "I think it would be better to clarify now while everyone is present." He tapped something on his phone and motioned toward a staff member near the projector. Within seconds, the large screen behind the stage lit up again. Not with my father's photos this time, but with the title page of the sponsorship contract. Valerie's face went pale. Lauren's eyes darted toward her mother, confusion replacing her earlier confidence. Section 7. Alan read aloud specifies that board appointments must include at least one active classroom educator. Failure to comply may constitute breach of agreement. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My father stood slowly. "Alan, that's unnecessary," he said sharply. "The board has always acted in good faith." Alan looked unconvinced. "Still, we'll need to verify compliance before finalizing tonight's announcement." Cameras flashed again. My father stepped closer to the microphone, his voice tight. "Let's handle this privately." I could feel Ethan's steady presence beside me, calm amid the unraveling. He leaned toward me, just enough for his words to reach my ear. "This is the beginning," he said quietly. "Just let it unfold." I turned back toward the stage, my pulse quickening. The tension in the room had shifted, subtle but unmistakable. For the first time all evening, my father didn't look entirely sure of himself. Lauren's practiced smile faltered. Valerie's hands clenched around her clutch. Somewhere behind me, I heard the faint buzz of phones recording. Whatever Ethan had set in motion was already underway, and though I didn't yet understand how, I could sense what was coming. The night that began with my humiliation wasn't finished. It was only turning its first corner. Alan's voice echoed through the microphone, but my father cut him off with practiced authority. "Alan, this isn't the time or place for procedural debates," he said, trying to steer control back toward the stage. His tone had softened into that familiar blend of charm and discipline that once commanded entire assemblies. "Let's keep the evening focused on celebration." The audience responded with polite applause, but the tension under it was unmistakable. Alan hesitated, glancing between his phone and my father, then took his seat. The music started again, trying to smooth over the unease, but the moment had cracked something open that couldn't be sealed back with applause. From across the room, Valerie caught my father's eye and offered a tight smile. Lauren leaned toward her, whispering something that made both of them straighten, as if they'd just agreed on a strategy. I stayed where I was, my hands folded in my lap, the air around me thick with everything left unsaid. The sound of laughter from the front table carried over the soft music, and I could make out bits of conversation donations, partnerships, plans for the next quarter. My name wasn't among any of them. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "He's not going to stop this," he said. "Not unless someone makes him." I turned toward him. "Ethan, please." "Don't," but he was already standing adjusting his jacket with deliberate calm. "I'll be right back," he said. "Just trust me." He moved through the tables, his shoulders squared his steps, quiet but certain. I sat frozen as my father returned to the microphone. "I know tonight's announcement may surprise some of you," he said smoothly, "but leadership requires fresh perspective. Lauren brings that to the Bright Future Fund. Together with our sponsors, she'll help us reimagine education for a modern world." I rose from my chair before I realized I was doing it. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Dad!" My voice carried farther than I expected, and dozens of faces turned toward me. The chatter faded until only the faint hum of the lights filled the silence. He blinked, startled. "Nora." "Not now," he said quickly, his smile returning for the crowd. "Yes, now." I stepped forward from behind the column, each word steady, though my hands trembled. "You promised me that seat 3 years ago. You said it belonged to someone who understood what teachers go through." Valerie's expression tightened. "Nora, please. You're causing a scene I repeated. I'm standing in a room full of people who claim to value education, and you just gave a teacher's position to someone who's never spent a day in a classroom." Lauren let out a soft, practiced laugh. "It's a leadership role, Nora, not an internship. It requires strategy and legal understanding." "Really?" I said, taking another step closer. "Because I've spent 10 years teaching strategy to 8-year-olds who could probably read a contract better than most adults in this room." Murmurs rippled across the tables. Martha rose halfway from her seat, her face pale. "Nora," she started, but I lifted a hand to stop her. My father's voice turned sharp. "That's enough. Sit down." I met his gaze. "You taught me to stand up for what's right. Remember, you told me education mattered more than titles or money." He glanced toward Valerie, whose jaw had tightened. "Security," she called, her voice cutting clean through the noise. 2 men in black suits appeared at the back of the room. The crowd shifted phones, lifting discreetly to record. Ethan's voice broke through from somewhere behind me. "That won't be necessary." His calm tone stopped the guards in their tracks. He walked toward us, composed as ever, and when he reached me, he rested a hand at the small of my back. "We'll leave quietly," he said, his eyes locked on my father's. "But before we go, I have a question." My father exhaled sharply. "Ethan, this is not the time." He smiled faintly. "Actually, I think it is. Do you even know who your new sponsor is, the one funding that $5 million? My father frowned, caught off guard. "Grantwell Corporation, of course. I've spoken to their liaison directly." "Interesting," Ethan said softly. "And did you review the contract yourself?" Valerie folded her arms. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to embarrass us." "I'm trying to clarify," Ethan said. "Because if you had read that agreement carefully, you'd know there's a clause requiring that board representation include an active classroom educator. Otherwise, the funding can be withdrawn without penalty." The room stilled. My father's expression flickered from irritation to confusion. "That's absurd," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. Ethan nodded toward Alan, who was now scrolling through his phone again. "Alan, check Section 7, he said evenly. Alan's face went pale as he did. "He's right," he murmured into the microphone. "The sponsor's terms are explicit." Valerie's composure cracked. "You can't possibly mean that this teacher," she gestured toward me, "qualifies for that position over my daughter." Ethan turned to her, his voice low but steady. "The contract doesn't care about last names or wardrobes, Mrs. Bennett. It cares about impact." My father's face flushed. "You've humiliated us," he hissed. "You've turned my retirement into a spectacle." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. No, Dad. You did that when you erased me from your own story. The crowd had gone silent. Every eye was on us, the favored family at the front, and the teacher at the back who dared to speak. Valerie's mask of poise was slipping. Lauren's confident smile had vanished entirely. Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket, tapping quickly before slipping it away again. "Alan," he said, "check your email. Something important should be there." Alan's phone buzzed almost immediately. He glanced down, eyes widening as he scrolled. "Oh my God," he whispered. My father turned toward him, alarmed. "What is it?" Alan looked up slowly. "We need to talk privately," he said, his voice low. The color drained from my father's face. He tried to speak, but the words faltered. "This isn't over," he muttered. Ethan stepped closer to the microphone. "Actually," he said calmly, "I think it is." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Come on, Nora. We've seen enough." The security guards parted as we walked toward the exit. Behind us, voices rose in confusion. Alan's firm tone, Valerie's protest, Lauren's anxious whisper. The flash of cameras followed us all the way to the ballroom doors. Valerie's voice rang out one last time. "You'll regret this," she shouted. Ethan paused, turning just enough for his voice to carry. "Maybe, but at least we'll do it standing up." He pushed the door open, and the music from inside dimmed as it closed behind us. The hallway was quieter, lined with framed photos of past graduates' faces of students who'd once looked to my father as the definition of success. I stood there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. Ethan loosened his tie, exhaling. "It's already in motion," he said. "They'll see the truth soon enough." I stared at him, the meaning not fully settling yet. "What did you send him?" He gave a small, knowing smile. "Proof," he said. And a reminder that teachers should never be underestimated. Through the doors behind us, a new wave of voices rose, urgent, overlapping, desperate to contain whatever had been unleashed. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel invisible. I felt the quiet before something enormous shifted. Ethan reached for my hand. "Let's go home," he said softly. As we walked toward the exit, the chandeliers flickered behind us, scattering light across the marble floor. Somewhere in that glittering silence, I realized that what began as humiliation had already started to turn into something else, something that would reach far beyond one ballroom and one family's pride. The hallway outside the ballroom felt cool and still a relief after the chaos inside. Ethan's hand was warm around mine, steadying. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Everything that needs to happen is already in motion." I could still hear fragments of voices through the double doors. Valerie's sharp tone, Alan's urgent questions, my father's clipped replies. The night that had begun with music and champagne had turned into a public reckoning, and I wasn't sure where it would end. Ethan led me toward the foyer, where the noise faded behind the thick carpeting. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He loosened his tie and exhaled the tension, leaving his shoulders in slow waves. "Do you trust me?" he asked. I nodded, though confusion pressed against every thought. "I don't understand what you sent him," I said. "You will," he answered. We didn't make it far. A security guard hurried toward us, earpiece glinting under the light. "Mr. Carter," he said out of breath. "They're asking for you to come back." Ethan hesitated, glancing at me. "Do you want to?" I asked. He shook his head once. "No, but I think it's time they see this through." When we stepped back into the ballroom, the mood had shifted. The music had stopped entirely. Alan stood at the front with his phone in hand, reading something on the screen. The projection behind him now displayed the Bright Future logo, and below it, the first lines of a contract clauses highlighted in bold. My father was pale, standing stiffly beside Valerie, who whispered furiously in his ear. Lauren looked lost, the confident tilt of her chin gone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alan began, his voice unsteady but clear. "There appears to be a discrepancy between the fund's recent announcement and the conditions outlined by its sponsor." He turned to my father. "Thomas, we need clarification." Before my father could answer, Ethan's voice carried across the room. "I can help with that." Heads turned. The murmurs spread like wind across dry leaves as he walked toward the stage, his calm presence commanding more attention than a raised voice ever could. My father's eyes narrowed. "You've made your point tonight," he said through his teeth. "Not yet," Ethan replied. He stepped up to the microphone. "You mentioned the Grantwell Corporation earlier, but that's not entirely accurate. The fund's primary sponsor isn't Grantwell. It's EduCore Technologies, a company that believes education should begin in the classroom, not the boardroom." Alan blinked. "EduCore?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, and as of 6 weeks ago, the Bright Future Fund signed a sponsorship agreement with EduCore's foundation division. I know this because I wrote it." A murmur swept through the crowd. My father looked stunned. "You can't be serious." Ethan's expression didn't change. Completely. And as outlined in Section 7 of that agreement, at least one active classroom educator must hold a voting position on the board. Otherwise, the sponsorship is void. Valerie's voice rose sharp and trembling. "This is absurd. No one would let a teacher manage millions of dollars." Ethan turned to her. "Then they shouldn't accept millions meant to help teachers." His tone was quiet, but every word landed with precision. Alan scrolled again, his brow furrowing. "He's right," he said finally. "It's all here." Lauren spoke up suddenly. "You can't just—" "I can," Ethan interrupted, "and I will." EduCore's funding was contingent on transparency and alignment with its mission. Tonight's announcement violated both. My father's composure cracked. "You manipulated this entire evening," he snapped. Ethan shook his head. "No, Thomas. I gave you an opportunity to honor your own values. You chose to trade them for prestige." The silence that followed was heavy. Cameras clicked. Someone near the back whispered, "Is he really the sponsor?" Another voice answered, "He's the founder." My father stepped forward, his voice low but shaking. "You're telling me you've been lying about who you are all this time?" Ethan looked at him evenly. "I never lied. You assumed." Valerie's cheeks flushed. "This is outrageous. You don't belong here." Ethan smiled faintly. "On the contrary, I built this." He turned to Alan. "As of now, EduCore withdraws its funding from the Bright Future Fund." Gasps rippled across the room. My father's hand shot out as if he could stop the words midair. "You can't just walk away. We've already announced this partnership." "You did," Ethan said without approval. "That alone breaches your contract." Lauren's phone buzzed and she glanced down. Her color drained. "My firm's general counsel wants a statement," she whispered to Valerie. "They're watching the live stream." The room erupted into motion. Reporters whispered urgently to one another. Board members huddled in small circles. Alan pressed his hand to his forehead, muttering about emergency meetings. Through it all, Ethan remained still. He looked toward me, then his voice steady. "There's one more thing." He faced the audience again. EduCore isn't withdrawing from education. It's redirecting its support to teachers who actually know what classrooms need. He turned slightly, his gaze meeting mine. "Tonight, I'm establishing a new initiative, the Nora Bennett Foundation for Educational Excellence." My breath caught. I hadn't expected my name to leave his mouth, not like this, not in front of everyone. "The foundation," Ethan continued, "will begin with the same $5 million commitment originally allocated to Bright Future. It will be managed by active educators and community partners, not politicians or attorneys." For a moment, no one spoke. Then slowly applause began at the back, Martha rising to her feet first. Others followed, teachers mostly clapping with quiet pride. My father looked around the room, disbelief turning to anger. "You've destroyed everything," he said hoarsely. 30 years of work gone." Ethan faced him without raising his voice. "No, Thomas. I've restored what you lost when you forgot why you started." Valerie's mask of poise crumbled. "We'll sue," she said. "We'll make sure this circus follows you for years." Ethan's calm never wavered. "You're welcome to try, but I imagine the headlines will do more damage than any lawsuit could." He nodded toward the rows of cameras now capturing every word. Lauren pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. "I need to make a call." Her voice was barely above a whisper. The applause grew louder, spreading across the room until it filled every corner of the ballroom. Teachers stood, support staff too. Even some donors joined them. For the first time that night, I saw the hierarchy crumble, those at the back standing taller than those at the front. Ethan handed the microphone to Alan. "You have my contact information," he said. "We'll coordinate the transition." Alan nodded, his voice quiet. "I think it's clear where the future of this fund belongs." Ethan stepped down from the stage and reached for my hand. "Let's go," he said. I followed him through the center aisle, the applause still echoing behind us. My father didn't move. He stood staring at the papers Alan held, his shoulders heavy under the weight of what he'd built and lost. When we reached the doors, Ethan paused and looked back once. "You always said education was about character," he said softly, just loud enough for my father to hear. "Tonight you met it." We walked into the corridor again, the sound of clapping fading into the distance. My mind was still catching up to what had just unfolded. "You named it after me," I asked, my voice barely steady. He smiled, tired but sure. "You earned it long before tonight." I stared at him for a moment, the enormity of everything settling slowly. Behind the closed doors, the Bright Future Fund was collapsing, but something far better had begun to rise. When we stepped out into the night air, the first cool breeze of spring met us. The hotel lights reflected against the wet pavement, and Ethan slipped his arm around my shoulders. "It's going to get noisy tomorrow," he said quietly. "I know," I answered. "But you'll be ready for it," he said. I nodded. Somewhere deep inside, I could already feel that shift, the moment when humiliation began to turn into strength. The story that had started with silence was finally being rewritten one truth at a time. By morning, the ballroom's chandeliers had become the backdrop of every trending headline. My phone lit up before sunrise, the first vibration jerking me awake. Principal's gala implodes over secret corporate deal. Another buzz teacher, humiliated, then declared hero of education. By the third alert, Ethan's name appeared beside mine, and I realized there was no going back to anonymity. The video of the gala had gone viral overnight. Every network had a clip my confrontation with my father Valerie's outburst, Ethan's quiet reveal. A split screen showed my father's red face beside Ethan's calm expression, the caption reading, "Power shifts in public." I didn't have to click the comments to know which way public sympathy had turned. At 7 a.m., my principal, Mrs. Franklin, called. Her voice was kind but cautious. "Nora, I saw the video. Don't worry, the district supports you. But maybe take today off. The press is outside." I thanked her and hung up. Outside our window, a white van idled at the curb. The logo read Channel 9 News. A woman in a gray coat spoke into a microphone while her cameraman adjusted the lens toward our porch. Ethan came in carrying 2 mugs of coffee, setting one beside me. "You should probably let me handle this," he said. But before he could finish, my phone rang again, this time an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but instinct told me to. "This is Nora," I said. "Miss Bennett, this is Claire Donovan with Channel 7. I'd love to give you a chance to share your side before anyone else shapes the story. Would you be open to a short interview later today?" I hesitated. Ethan met my eyes. "Take it," he mouthed. "Fine," I said, "but only if it's in person and you let me approve the segment before it airs." Claire agreed instantly. By noon, she arrived with a small crew and a calm professionalism that put me at ease. We sat at the kitchen table while Ethan quietly worked in the next room. "The public's fascinated," she began. "You went from being ignored to having a foundation named after you in one night. What does that feel like?" I took a breath. "Strange," I said honestly. "But it's not about me. It's about what teachers live with every day, working hard, being overlooked, then expected to smile through it." Claire nodded. "And your father?" I looked down at my hands folded on the table. "He's been a good principal. But somewhere along the way, he started measuring success in headlines instead of students." She didn't press further. The interview lasted 20 minutes, but by the time they packed up, the heaviness in my chest had eased. It wasn't revenge. It was release. That night, Claire's segment aired. The story was balanced: Ethan's role as EduCore's founder, my father's mishandling of the gala, and the new Nora Bennett Foundation. But what surprised me most were the final words. "Sometimes the people who teach quietly make the loudest difference." The next morning, donations began flooding the foundation's website. Teachers across the country shared the clip with the hashtag #TeachWithNora. Messages poured in. "You gave us a voice. I've been you for years. Thank you for standing up when no one else could." But while the public rallied, my father's world began to crumble. The district announced an emergency review of the Bright Future Fund. Allen released a statement confirming the contract breach and confirming that the fund's assets were frozen pending investigation. Lauren's law firm issued a press release distancing itself from the scandal. Valerie deleted every social media profile she had. By Friday, local news vans had replaced the photographers outside my father's house. One of the neighbors told Ethan that reporters were asking for comment. My father refused. Valerie, however, gave them plenty, calling the incident an ambush orchestrated by a manipulative son-in-law and an ungrateful daughter. The quote backfired instantly. Viewers replayed her words alongside clips of her dismissing teachers at the gala, comments filled with disbelief. Ungrateful. She built her career from nothing. This woman's more concerned with her image than integrity. The backlash was swift and merciless. My father's pending speaking engagements were canceled within days. Sponsors withdrew. By the following Monday, he formally resigned from the district board. When I heard the news, I didn't celebrate. I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, listening to the quiet hum of spring. Ethan joined me, setting down 2 mugs of tea. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "It doesn't feel like winning." He nodded. "It's not supposed to. Justice rarely feels like victory. It just feels like truth finally catching up." We sat in silence a long time. The street was calm, the kind of ordinary peace that had felt impossible for weeks. I finally looked over at him. "What happens next?" He smiled faintly. "Now we build. The foundation team is waiting for your direction." The following days blurred into meetings, calls, and interviews. Martha became my first board member, handling outreach to local teachers. We hired a small staff to manage grants and partnerships. Ethan oversaw the transition, but made sure my name, not his, was on every letterhead. When the first donation milestone hit $2 million, the office erupted in applause. I looked at the whiteboard filled with programs, mentorships, supply grants, scholarships for new educators, and felt something solid settle in my chest. This wasn't just repair, it was renewal. Still, the fallout from the gala continued to ripple. One afternoon, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was my father. "We need to talk." I hesitated before replying. Hours passed. Finally, I texted back, "When you're ready to listen, not defend." 2 days later, he showed up at the foundation office without warning. He looked smaller somehow, the proud edges worn down. "You've done well," he said quietly. I gestured toward the hallway. "Let's talk in my office." He sat across from me, glancing at the framed photos of students and classrooms on the wall. "I never wanted this to happen," he said. "I was trying to protect what I built. I know I said, but you forgot who you built it for." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." His hands trembled slightly. "The district asked if I'd make a public apology. I wanted you to hear it first. I didn't speak. I just waited." "I'm sorry, Nora. For all of it, for ignoring what you do, for letting pride speak louder than reason." The words hung between us, fragile but real. I believed him not because he sounded perfect, but because he sounded tired of pretending. When he left, he stopped at the doorway. "You were right," he said. "Education isn't about prestige. It's about people." That night, his apology aired on the evening news. It wasn't polished or rehearsed, just a man standing at a podium admitting his failures. Viewers respected him for it. The comments were kinder this time. Weeks later, when the Nora Bennett Foundation hosted its first teacher award ceremony, my father came quietly, sitting in the back. He didn't speak to anyone, but when our eyes met, he nodded, once proud but humbled. The applause that filled the room that night sounded different. It wasn't about power or exposure. It was gratitude, genuine and earned. As the event ended, Ethan leaned close and whispered, "You ready for what's next?" I smiled. "Not yet. But I think I finally know where I'm supposed to stand." Outside, the evening air was cool, the city lights reflected in the windows of the new foundation office. Somewhere behind us, cameras still flashed, but for once they didn't matter. Everything that had needed to be exposed already had, and what came next would belong entirely to those who'd once been invisible. The weeks after my father's apology moved quietly, like the steady rhythm after a long storm. The frenzy of cameras faded. The phone stopped ringing. What remained were the echoes of a story that had reshaped everything I thought I knew about my family, my work, and myself. At the foundation, life had taken on a new rhythm. Mornings began early with coffee and folders spread across the conference table. Martha coordinated scholarship applications, while I handled program evaluations and teacher outreach. Ethan split his time between EduCorps and our new grant division, careful to let me lead. Each day ended with the same sense of calm purpose, something that had once felt impossible. Still, reminders of the past found their way in. News headlines about the Bright Future Fund's dissolution appeared every few days. A follow-up report revealed financial irregularities traced back years before the gala. The district quietly severed all ties with the organization. My father's name surfaced less and less, replaced by profiles of new leadership initiatives shaped by teachers who'd reached out after seeing the viral video. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the office, Martha walked in holding a newspaper. "You should see this," she said, handing it over. The front page featured a photo of the old Bright Future building, its doors locked, a for lease sign in the window. The headline read, "Old Fund Closes, New Foundation Flourishes." I smiled faintly. It feels strange, doesn't it? Watching something end so another thing can begin. Martha nodded. Sometimes that's how balance works. You had to shake the table for people to notice what was missing. A knock on the office door interrupted us. Alan Brooks stood there holding an envelope. He looked different, less formal, almost relieved. "I came by to deliver something in person," he said. "It's official. The investigation's closed." I exhaled. "And they found no wrongdoing on your father's part," he said. "He wasn't involved in the accounting issues, but he lost his position permanently. The board's been dissolved." He paused, setting the envelope on my desk. "And the district asked if you'd consider taking a consulting role advising new education partnerships." The room went still. Martha looked at me, smiling quietly. "They finally figured out who knows what she's talking about." Alan chuckled. "Let's just say the right people are paying attention now. You changed more than one life that night." After he left, I stared at the envelope for a long time. It felt symbolic, like a closing door that no longer carried pain, just release. That afternoon, Ethan stopped by after his meeting downtown. "You've been quiet," he said, setting a sandwich on my desk. "Alan was here," I told him. "They cleared Dad completely. He's not getting his old job back, but it's over." Ethan nodded, leaning against the doorway. "Then it's time to stop looking backward." "I know," I said softly, "but part of me wonders if he's okay." "Have you called him?" "Not yet." He smiled. "Then start there." That evening I drove to my father's house for the first time since the gala. Valerie's car was gone, the front porch lights dimmed. He opened the door before I could knock, his expression uncertain. "Nora," he said, voice rough from surprise. "Come in." The house felt smaller than I remembered, quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Family photos still lined the walls, Lauren's law school graduation, Valerie's charity luncheons, but now there was dust on the frames. "I saw the news," I said. "Alan told me about the investigation." He nodded. "Yes. They sent me a letter this morning. It's strange, I thought I'd feel relieved, but instead I just feel empty." I sat across from him at the kitchen table. "You built something good once. It just got lost under the wrong spotlight." He looked down at his hands. "I know. I let pride decide what mattered. And when the light turned away, I realized I hadn't left room for anything real." We sat in silence for a moment. Then he reached for a small folder beside him and slid it across the table. Inside was a faded photo of me standing in front of my third-grade classroom, chalk dust on my hands, and a grin too wide for my face. "I kept this," he said. "Your mother took it. She said you were born to teach." My throat tightened. She was right. He smiled weakly. She usually was. He hesitated. "Valerie moved out. Lauren's gone too. I don't blame them. They were chasing something I built for them. What about you? I asked. I'm thinking of volunteering at the Community Literacy Center, he said. They need help with adult education programs. Seems like a good place to start over. I nodded. That sounds like something worth doing. He glanced toward the window, the evening light soft against the curtains. I've been reading the articles about your foundation, he said. You've done more in 3 months than I managed in 30 years. It's not about competition, I said gently. He shook his head. I know, but it's nice to see the legacy in better hands. When I left that night, he walked me to the door. You know, he said quietly, I didn't understand the kind of strength it takes to stand up in public like you did, but I do now. I smiled faintly. Maybe one day you'll tell that to someone else who needs to hear it. He nodded. Maybe I already have. Driving home, the sky stretched wide and clear, streaked with faint orange light. It struck me how endings can sometimes look like beginnings if you catch them from the right angle. Over the next few weeks, the foundation expanded faster than any of us expected. Major donors joined in, inspired by the transparency and teacher-led structure. We opened satellite programs in 3 districts, including the one my father once led. One morning, Claire Donovan returned to film a follow-up story for the evening news. She walked through the new office cameras, capturing the laughter and movement of teachers filling supply boxes for underfunded schools. As we stood for the closing shot, Claire turned to me. You've become something of a symbol, Nora, she said. What do you think made all this possible? I paused. Listening, I said simply, for too long, teachers weren't heard. Now we're building something that listens back. That night, the segment aired to millions of viewers. It ended with a shot of the foundation's sign, the Nora Bennett Foundation for Educational Excellence letters, bright against the brick facade. When I got home, Ethan was waiting on the porch, 2 glasses of wine in hand. You looked good on camera, he said with a smile. I was terrified, I admitted, sitting beside him. You didn't look it. We sat there watching the streetlights blink on one by one. The world felt quieter now, not empty, just balanced. Somewhere out there, my father was probably locking up the literacy center after another long evening of volunteer work. And for once, that thought didn't hurt. It just fit. Ethan set his glass down and looked at me. You realize, he said, you turned what they tried to erase into something they can't ignore. I didn't answer right away. I just looked toward the foundation office across the street, lights still glowing in the windows. No, I said softly. We did. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint hum of the city in the distance, the kind of night that doesn't need a finale, just the quiet satisfaction of something finally set right. But deep down, I knew one more chapter still waited to be written, the moment when peace wouldn't just be professional, but personal. And that moment, I suspected, was closer than I thought. The months that followed settled into a rhythm I'd never known before. Steady, peaceful, almost ordinary. The foundation grew faster than any of us imagined. Teachers from across the country applied for grants, classrooms finally received supplies without begging for donations, and students who once shared torn textbooks now held new ones with their names printed inside. Every week we received thank you letters written in careful handwriting or late-night emails from exhausted teachers saying, "You made me feel seen." Sometimes I'd stay late in the office, the city quiet outside, rereading those letters. They reminded me why it had all mattered, the humiliation, the confrontation, the truth revealed in that glittering ballroom. What began as a wound had turned into something far greater than pride. My father kept his word about volunteering. Once a week he sent a brief message. Taught 2 adults to read tonight. Harder than I thought. Feels good. They were simple updates, but they meant more than any apology could. It wasn't reconciliation overnight. It was something slower, quieter, 2 people meeting halfway after years of silence. In early autumn, the foundation hosted its first national conference. Teachers from every state filled the convention hall, their voices blending into a kind of hopeful music. As I stood backstage waiting to speak, I spotted my father near the back row, hands folded, watching. He looked smaller than I remembered, but peaceful. When I finished my speech, the crowd rose in applause, and I saw him stand to clapping with the others. No spotlight, no microphone, just a father recognizing what he'd once overlooked. After the ceremony, he found me near the stage steps. "You did well," he said quietly. "So did you," I answered. "Those students at the literacy center, they keep asking for you." He smiled, eyes soft. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm teaching again." That night, as we packed up, Ethan slid his arm around my shoulders. "You know," he said, "what you built here, it's more than a foundation. It's proof that decency still matters." I leaned into him. It's proof that being underestimated isn't the same as being powerless. Outside, the evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. Across the plaza, a group of teachers lingered laughing together under the streetlights. I recognized one of them, a young woman who'd just received her first grant. She reminded me of myself years ago, hopeful but unsure of where she fit in the world. "Do you think people ever really change?" I asked Ethan. He thought for a moment. "Not all at once," he said, "but sometimes a single truth spoken out loud can start the process." He was right. Change doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It happens in quiet choices like walking away from what diminishes you or standing up even when your voice shakes. It's in the decision to stop needing permission to matter. As the months rolled on, life returned to something beautifully simple. I still taught third grade. My mornings began with the sound of pencils scratching across paper and laughter spilling through the classroom door. On Fridays, a few of my students would stop by the foundation office after school, dropping off drawings they'd made for the teachers who helped teachers. We hung them on the wall like trophies, crayon-colored reminders of what success really looks like. One afternoon, I received a small package at the office. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper and a worn photograph. It was my father and me taken years ago at my first classroom open house. On the back he'd written, "For everything I failed to see, I finally do now." There were no more words, and none were needed. That night, I walked through the quiet halls of the foundation, past the framed photos of classrooms and smiling teachers. I stopped beneath the plaque by the entrance, the Nora Bennett Foundation for Educational Excellence. My name was there in metal and light, but what mattered most wasn't the name. It was what it stood for, the teachers who stayed, who showed up, who refused to be invisible. Looking back, I realized the greatest change wasn't in my father or the family name, it was in me. I'd stopped measuring my worth by who recognized it. I'd stopped chasing approval from people who couldn't see past their own reflection. Somewhere between that empty chair at the gala and this moment, I'd learned the quiet power of standing firm in who you are. Ethan found me there reading the plaque. "You ready to go?" he asked. "Almost," I said, "just thinking about how far everything's come." He smiled. "You've built something that'll outlive all of us." I looked back one last time before turning off the lights. The hallway glowed softly in the dim reflection of the city outside. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I was walking toward everything that finally made sense. If you've ever been made to feel small for the work you love, I hope you remember this. Your worth isn't decided by titles, salaries, or seats at anyone's table. It lives in the impact you leave, the kindness you give, and the courage it takes to keep going when no one claps. Thank you for listening to my story. If it spoke to you, share it with someone who might need the reminder. And wherever you are, keep doing the quiet work that changes the world, one honest act at a time.